This presentation is going to focus on title to property and the types of interests that can be used to provide property to someone else in a variety of formats. The real property system under the common law is known as the estate system. And an estate is defined as an interest in real property. Now, this is all just by way of background. It's not something that you need to include in any type of rule when you're answering an essay question. But real property ownership and an owner's ability to transfer or use the land can vary depending on the interest that the owner possesses, depending on how they hold title to the property. So we use a metaphor of the bundle of sticks to describe different types of estates and interests. On one end of the spectrum, an individual can possess and control the full bundle of sticks, giving that individual owner the highest degree of control and the highest degree of possession. And as you move away from this end of the spectrum, an individual owner can have control over a fewer number of sticks in the bundle, and as a result can be restricted in their abilities. So the purpose of this presentation today is to provide an overview of the primary estates and interests in real property, and to provide you some examples of each of them and the language that is used to create them. What you will need to understand and keep track of are the terms for the different types of title, the language that's used to provide that title to someone, and what the corresponding interest is if there's a future interest, and then what happens with that. So the first one has only one interest. There's no future interest. It is an interest that is the entire bundle of sticks. We call this fee simple absolute. And you do need to use that term, fee simple absolute. The highest level of ownership a person can have in property is this fee simple absolute. And this means that that person has the right to own and possess the property in perpetuity. So they can pass it down to their heirs, they can sell it, they can keep it in the family for as long as they want. The fee simple itself can be subjected to various conditions or contingencies. And that's why we refer to this as fee simple absolute, because it is completely unconditional. It doesn't have any of the conditions. It doesn't have any contingencies. You'll see that we use the term fee simple for other forms as well, but what the descriptor is after that fee simple tells you how much of the bundle of sticks a person owns. So fee simple absolute, for example, would be in this situation. Fred owns an apartment building in fee simple absolute. He sells his apartment building to Ricky for $1 million. Once Ricky buys the apartment building, he takes all of Fred's rights to the building. He therefore now owns fee simple absolute in the building, and he has the right to possess it forever or sell it to a third party. And in addition, if he dies without otherwise disposing of the building, his heirs take over that building. Now, we can also have a slightly different situation, and this is to distinguish between the various types. So if Fred owns the apartment building in fee simple absolute, and he sells his apartment building to Ricky for $1 million, however, at the time of the deal, Fred has a clause written into the contract that says that if Ricky ever divorces his wife, then the apartment building will go back to Fred. Although Ricky has that fee simple in the building, he has the right to possess it forever. It's not fee simple absolute because there's conditions on it. So Ricky's estate would be classified as a fee simple, but not as fee simple absolute. So it has to be without condition, without any contingencies. The language that's historically been used to create a fee simple absolute is to X and his heirs. Even though historically it didn't work this way, we also now recognize simply saying to X as creating fee simple absolute. So, for example, Omar gives Whiteacre to Andrew and his heirs. Andrew has a fee simple absolute. If Omar gives if Omar gives Whiteacre to Andrew, then he also has fee simple absolute. So the rules about fee simple absolute are simple. The holder has absolute ownership. His or her ownership lasts forever unless the holder transfers it. There are no limitations on who the holder can give, sell, or devise the land to. And the owner can't have the property taken away from him. If he dies or if she dies without giving away the property, it goes to his or her heirs. Now, there are other types of fee simple titles that are defeasible fees. A defeasible fee is simply a fee simple interest in land that can be taken away from the holder by the occurrence or the non-occurrence of a specific event. We're going to start with the fee simple determinable, and the corresponding interest for that is the possibility of reverter. A fee simple determinable is an interest in land that will end automatically if a certain specified event happens. Putting it another way, a fee simple determinable is a fee simple interest that's subject to a restriction that has the potential to terminate that interest. For the interest to exist or to continue to exist, a certain event either has to happen or not happen. So, for example, Fred owns an acre of land. Fred gives the land to Barney as long as the land is used to plant corn. This is a fee simple determinable. Barney now owns the land, but his ownership will automatically end if he ever uses it for something other than growing corn. If Barney grows corn for 10 years and then in the 11th year decides to grow potatoes, Barney's ownership of the land will automatically end, and the land will automatically return to Fred. If Barney's children ever stop using the land for corn, if it passes to his children, the ownership will automatically end, and the land will go back to Fred or Fred's heirs if Fred is no longer alive. If Barney and his children keep going using it for corn, and Barney's great-great-great-grandchildren ever use the land for something other than growing corn, the land will go back to Fred's heirs. Now, note that a fee simple determinable can be transferred. So in the above example that I was just describing, Barney can sell the land to whoever he wants. However, whoever buys the land still owns it, subject to the condition that existed when Barney owned it. So if Barney were to sell the land to Mr. Slate, Mr. Slate would also have to use the land to grow corn. If he used the land for anything else, he would lose his interest and the land would go back to Fred. And this is because Barney can't sell an interest that's greater than the one that he owned. Since he owned the fee simple determinable, that's all he can transfer to a third party. So it ends automatically upon the occurrence of a certain event or upon the non-occurrence of an event that's currently happening. The creation of a fee simple determinable is accomplished by using language such as to X and his heirs for so long as, and then you insert the event or the condition in there. So for as long as they continue to grow corn, or to recipient until they cease doing this particular activity, until they stop using the land for farming. If that kind of language is used, the recipient receives a fee simple determinable, and the original owner retains what's referred to as a possibility of reverter. And that name comes from the fact that even though the owner has given fee simple to the recipient, there is the possibility that the property will someday revert back to the original owner or their heirs. So that's why we call it a possibility of reverter. Now, of course, the original owner doesn't have to retain that possibility of reverter. Instead, he can give that interest to a third party. And if he does so, that interest that the third party holds is actually called an executory interest. We call it that because in law, something that is executory is something that hasn't yet taken effect, but it potentially can take effect. So although the third party has the right to have the property if the fee simple determinable terminates, that right hasn't yet vested and may in fact never vest if the condition that ends the fee simple determinable does not occur. So therefore that person, the third party, has an executory interest. And we refer to that not as a fee simple determinable, actually it's a form of a fee simple determinable, but we refer to it as a fee simple subject to an executory interest. It is exactly like a fee simple determinable in that it ends automatically upon certain events happening or not happening. But instead of reverting back to the original owner, when it is established, it is the executory interest is given to someone else, to a third party. So here's an example. John Adams wants to give his house to his nephew Sam. However, he's worried that Sam and his friends drink too much, and he doesn't want his house to turn into a beer party hall. On the other hand, he has no interest in getting the house back either. Instead, he would want his friend Thomas to have the house if Sam doesn't have it. So he gives the house to Sam and says he's giving it to Sam so long as beer is not consumed on the premises, and then to Thomas. And by doing this, Sam has a fee simple determinable, but because it's going to a third party, we're going to call it a fee simple subject to an executory interest. And Thomas has that executory interest. Now, we can also have a fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. This kind of sounds like math to me, but, or math or geometry, I can't remember which ones had condition subsequent, but anyway, a fee simple subject to condition subsequent. And this is very simple, very similar to the fee simple determinable. The biggest difference, the major difference, is that while the fee simple determinable and the fee simple with an executory interest automatically ends if the person who received the land doesn't fulfill the condition, the grantee's interest, that person who receives the land, in the fee simple subject to a condition subsequent doesn't automatically end if the event or the condition occurs. Instead, the grantor may, if he or she wants to, take the land back, but they have to take a particular action. They have to actually choose to take action to take that property back. And we call that a right of entry or a right of re-entry. So if they don't want to take the land back, they can simply allow the grantee's interest to continue. So here's an example using Fred and Barney still. Fred gives an acre of land to Barney so long as the land is used to grow corn. It's a fee simple determinable. If Barney ever uses the land for something other than growing corn, the land automatically reverts back to Fred. But instead, if Fred used language like to Barney, but if the land is ever used for something other than growing corn, then Fred retains the right of entry. That's a fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. If the land is used for growing potatoes, Fred has the right to reclaim the land. However, if Fred doesn't exercise that right of re-entry, then Barney's ownership of the land simply continues as before. So bringing it back to our example with John Adams and Sam, if John Adams gives his house to his nephew Sam, and he doesn't really want Sam to be drinking beer at the property, he could say he's giving it to Sam so long as beer is not consumed on the premises. But if it ever is, then I have a right of entry. He could also give Thomas his right of re-entry if he chose. So in that situation, if John saw that Sam Adams was creating beer, making beer, having beer on the property. But he recognized that it wasn't for a beer party. It was because he'd started this business that was taking off. Then he could choose to not do anything, not re-enter and allow the event to continue. In that case, Sam would still own the property as a fee simple subject to a condition subsequent. And if John ever decided that he did want to re-enter and take the property back for that condition happening, he could take that action and he could retain it. He could pull the property back. The owner of a fee simple interest has complete control over all the sticks in the bundle. And another stick that a fee simple owner can grant is a life estate in real property. A life estate is an ownership interest that's limited to the duration of some person's lifetime. The lifetime can be measured by the life of the individual who holds the life estate, who is known as the life tenant, or another designated person. When the life estate is measured by the lifespan of another designated person, it's called a life estate pour autre vie, which in French means for another's life. Now, a life estate is very simple to create. The grantor is simply required to specify in the deed that the grantee is receiving a life estate in the property, and they can use the language to X for life. When the life tenant dies, the grantor gets the land back. It's kind of like a lifetime lease. The life tenant has all the ownership rights and can benefit from the property. And the life tenant is not only able to possess the property, but they can mortgage it and they can use it as their own property. However, they can't transfer it in a way that allows someone else to have property for their life. So basically, they can't sell the property. And most importantly, they can't cause waste. This means that the life tenant can't allow the real property to fall into deterioration or be destroyed. If he or she does, the holder of the remainder interest or the reversionary interests, I'll explain those in just a moment, can potentially sue the life tenant for damages. Basically the same way a landlord can sue a tenant for damage to rented property. So here's a couple of situations. John gives an acre of land to Mary for life. Mary has a life estate. She has an interest in the land that lasts as long as she lives, and the interest ends when she dies. John gets the property back. It reverts back to him. So it's not just a possibility of a reverter, but it automatically reverts. He owns the reversion because it's going to happen. When Mary dies, it's going to become his or his heirs again. So we refer to that as a reversion. Now, another thing that could happen is John can give an acre of land to Mary for the life of Chris. Mary then has a life estate pour autre vie, which is measured by Chris's life. She has an interest in the land that lasts as long as Chris lives, and the interest will end when Chris dies. And if Mary dies before Chris, her heirs take over the land for as long as Chris continues to live. So they probably want to keep Chris healthy and living. Now, a life estate can also be made conditional in the same way that fee simple can. So Fred could give that acre of land to Barney for life, so long as land is used to grow corn. In this situation, he's going to have a determinable life estate. And as long as he continues to grow corn, he gets to keep the property until he dies. And once he dies, the land goes back to Fred. Fred could also give an acre of land to Barney for life, but if he ever uses it for something other than growing corn, then Fred has the right of re-entry. Remember, that would be a life estate subject to a condition subsequent. So if Barney uses the land to grow corn, and the life estate will end when he dies, but if he doesn't use it for growing corn, Fred has to take action to re-enter the land and take possession. and Fred could give the acre of land to Barney for life, so long as he never uses the land for something other than growing corn, and the remainder to Betty. In this case, Barney has a life estate subject to an executory interest. If Barney uses the land to grow corn, the life estate will end when Barney dies. If Barney uses the land for any other purpose, his life estate automatically ends and Betty gets the land. But Betty's interest in the land is a life estate pour autre vie, with Barney's life as the measuring life, and it will end when Barney dies. So that's a complication there, because in this instance we can have the land transferred to X for life or to X for the life of someone else, and we can add the other types of contingencies. So you do want to pay a little bit of attention to what that language is, especially when you see a life estate. Remember also that what the future interest is depends on whether we're talking about the original owner or someone else that will get the property. So if this property was given to X for life and then to A, then we would have a life estate and a remainder interest, because it's not reverting back to the grantor, it's going to someone else. So the original owner holds a reversion, but if they are going to allow the property interest to transfer to a third party when the life tenant dies, then that interest, the third party's interest, is called a remainder. It's not a reversion because the third party never had it in the first place, so it can't revert to him or her. So just a couple of last examples. If we had Star transferring a parcel to Clinton for life, Clinton has a life estate and Star has a reversion. But if we had Star transferring the parcel to Clinton for life and then to Lewinsky, Clinton has a life estate and Lewinsky has a remainder. So it becomes pretty simple. And then again, as I mentioned, we could tack on the conditional aspects as well, and that you would tack on with the terminology for the type of conditions that would be applied. Now, over hundreds of years, the common law has evolved to provide real property owners with this estate system. It's lasted a long time. It allows us to understand an owner's rights, abilities, and interests, and at times it can sound really complicated and confusing. But if you break it apart and look at each of the different terms and what the interest is that's being transferred, and begin to understand why the future interests have the name that they have, it begins to become a bit more understandable and navigable. And that's essentially all you need to know about these interests for the bar exam essays, because these are, they're complicated and they're not going to make the essay questions super, super complicated. So this is the level of complication that you're going to find, but you always want to make sure when you're dealing with a real property question that you understand what interests all of the parties have in the property and how those might play out. So you might end up having to actually draw little flowcharts, kind of like the one that's on this screen, so that you can see who's getting what and what has to happen in order for that to happen. So that covers estates in property and future interests. There's more material in your text, and we will do some work with an essay so that you can see what the rubric looks like. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you have questions. I'd be happy to go into more detail in class sessions as well.